As you can see, I have parachuted in safely, and my dear guest, who I will bring on within seconds, has also parachuted in safely. Thank you so much for joining me again on the Southern Report and giving me the privilege of your time. Today is an extremely important subject, and I will bring my guest on, Melanie. Melanie will pronounce her surname, and we will move on. We will move on from there, where she will talk about what she does and talk about a very important subject issue that many of us are facing. But the most important thing is what our young people are facing. Melanie, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for putting up with the emails going. Let's check all the international time zones so that we're actually being able to be here at the same time. So it's much appreciated. And the reason why I was saying that is because our clocks have gone back. And when our clocks have gone back, it becomes even more confusing for a week with time zones in America. So thank you. Melanie, could you very just politely pronounce your whole name so I don't have the embarrassment of getting it wrong?
Sure. So I'm Dr. Melanie Mcrites-Bachert.
Right. Melanie, you are a surgeon.
Mm-hmm.
What is your speciality? What have you trained to do, and then you work in that now?
Yeah, so I am a urological surgeon. So I did a stint of time doing general surgery to prepare then for the transition into urology. And I trained for 4 years as a urologic surgeon. And then from there went on to do 2 more years of fellowship, specifically in pelvic reconstruction for both men and women.
So that's 6 years of training. And then what training happened before that? How many years was that before that?
Well, I was very fortunate. I graduated from college in 3 years, so I was a go-getter.
Right.
Graduated from college in 3 years, and then I had 4 years of medical school, and then a year of internship, then a year of general surgery, 4 years of urology, and 2 years of fellowship.
So that's about, if I've got my maths right, is that about 15 years?
Yeah, almost, yes.
Wow. And I mean, but asking that question, how do you then keep the pressure up to then say, I've got another year, I've got another 2 years, I've got another 3 years? I suppose you can't think about it in those terms in many ways, but the dedication that you've had to give.
Yeah, it has been tough at times, a lot of sleepless nights, certainly not being the owner of my own life, because, you are certainly subject to the call schedules and things such as that. In fact, I now work primarily remotely because I am licensed in all 50 states and DC. So I primarily work remotely, but I, in fact, just finished a 4-day stretch of call because I do call ever so often to keep my skills up. And in fact, I was up all night Thursday night. By the time I went to bed Friday morning, it was after 8 o'clock in the morning, and I had been up over 24 hours with emergent surgeries and things like that. So you certainly have that. Those sorts of things that it makes it a little difficult at times to just kind of keep going. But when you see the patients do well and they're appreciative, it really does, kind of cliche, but that really does make it worthwhile.
When you please excuse my ignorance, when you use that term remotely, I can understand what remotely means, but what does that mean in your case?
Because I'm licensed in all 50 states and DC, I do video visits now with patients. I have transitioned to primarily work from home. So I, see patients by video visit for appropriate sorts of things. Certainly surgery can't be done remotely, but there are, conditions that can very appropriately be treated by virtual medicine. So that's primarily what I do. I also help out some companies who need a medical director. So because of all of my state licenses, I'm able to serve as medical director and make sure that, everything is compliant from a clinical standpoint, and that the providers in the network are following the rules, so to speak.
How do you get into a position where you are able to then conduct your business, so to speak, across all the states? And then when you interestingly see, say, including Washington, D.C., which is another subject in itself in regard to that definition.
Yes.
But how do you get to that point where you're able to do that?
You have to apply for all of the state licenses. So when COVID hit, I kind of saw the writing on the wall, and I was in private practice at the time, and I pretty well knew what was going to happen once I saw how everything was unfolding, and I knew that I was going to have a backup plan. First time in my life. As a doctor, you never think that you're going to need a backup plan as a doctor, because the only two things that are guaranteed in this life are living and dying. So, I always said, if you're a doctor or you're a funeral director, you have job security. And so when COVID hit, I knew I was going to need a backup plan, because I knew I was not going to take the shot. And I knew my family was not going to do that. And being the primary breadwinner, of course, I needed to be able to generate some revenue. And so I started applying for all of my state licenses and got them.
Good for you. And just for the record, nor did I take the COVID stupidity. So I think also it'd be very interesting what wordage we use in our vocabulary in regard to that, of how YouTube then reacts to that. But you would have been, as things unfolded in America with all the shutdowns, and then we had our own, just talking about the UK, our own stupidity. And I have to say, before we segue into other matters, that really did, and I don't have a medical background, and I try and avoid going to the doctor as much as possible. And we have a system. So we have what we will call as you're aware of, the National Health Service, as you wonderfully call it, socialized medicine. So the state pays for that from out of our taxes. And I'm not saying that we don't have private healthcare. We do. And my own understanding of history, that the NHS then signed its first contract with Pfizer in 1954. I am also conscious, as you are, from your medical training and then chatting to other friends, we're also conscious of both sides of the pond when, in regard to our newborn and children, how many vaccines they are facing on your side of the pond, how many vaccines now that we are seeing on this side of the pond. And I'm going to join two things up, because I think it leads into this. And it is a very, very uncomfortable subject. But having had the privilege to recently, in the last few days, interview Sammy Steigman, and Sammy was born in 1939. Sammy is Jewish, and he was experimented on under the Nazi regime. And all of that, all those roads lead to Mengele, all those roads lead to Auschwitz, Birkenau too, and beyond. And if people don't believe us, then we just ask you to go and do the research and get some books where people have been stenographers at the Nuremberg trials, where some of these doctors have been on trial. Just for the record, Mengele was never caught, and then died in South Africa many years after the war. And why do I say that? Because we look at, is a phrase, the medical industrial complex, is that a fair phrase to use, Melanie?
It is.
Right.
It is. It's a machine. It is absolutely a machine.
Well, I must say that it must have for you to make that decision, then looking at, no, I'm not going to take this, I'm not going to take these shots, and where that led, for many people, and particularly as I am talking to you, that's a very, very brave decision to then stand by on our beliefs. Did it for me that whole situation meant that I had to look at germ theory or terrain, and the fact that, yes, as someone who was younger, I have had vaccines. When I've traveled abroad, I'd had vaccines. I swallowed the whole thing. I believed in it. And now I deeply question all of that, including giving, I have to be honest, giving those to my children as well, because we went all through that. I think the whole incident with MMR over here began to question a lot of things. Did that whole incident mean that you had to really look at your training and all that you had been fed, or was it something that you were aware of before?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because I am a holistic practitioner. So I am an osteopathic physician. So I was trained to look at mind, body, spirit, and to utilize manual medicine to treat the body as well. And my profession, not being allopathic, it really rests on that philosophy. Now, that's not to say that it hasn't been perverted over the years to become more mainstream, but I was always an independent thinker. And so when I went through medical school, I learned the facts. I learned the functions of the body. When we had pharmacology, it wasn't sponsored by a particular particular big pharma. It was these are the substances, this is what they do to the body, these are the side effects. And I looked at things purely from a scientific standpoint. And having also been involved in research myself, I know, and I'm very cognizant of the fact that research, for whatever that means, it's very hard to find unbiased, free-thinking research that actually looks at everything and puts everything together. So there are medical schools that are now full of propaganda and full of indoctrination, but fortunately, I did not go to one of those medical schools back in the day when I went through. And had I been in an institution like that, I would have had enough discernment to know, still, just learn the facts, learn what you need to learn, and let everything else, go by the wayside.
In one sense, it's good to know that there are training facilities in America that go along that route, because I'm not a medical doctor. I don't have any of that training. I can only go by what I then have looked at. I don't think that's necessarily the case in this country. And that's partly because, if we say geographically, the UK could fit into Texas 2.2 times, where you are far larger in regard to that, where it goes Russia, Canada, and then it goes you in regard to landmass. But which means the whole essence of freedom, the foundation of America and what it stands for, then you're leading into this. So how much when you were being trained, and I know it's going back to memory, how much of pharmacology did you look at? Because that whole thing over here, that people may not look at it enough.
Oh no, we had a whole year's worth. It was, it wasn't just condensed into, one thing at a time. I mean, it was extensive, and it was a whole year's worth of pharmacology. So as we were studying each different bodily system in the other classes, then the pharmacology would go along with that. So the one thing that the one class that you knew you were going to have for the entire year was pharmacology, because we learned it in chapters with each body system that we were learning.
Right. And going back to the COVID, Novid stupidity years, as I'll call it, what made you think, no, I'm not taking this thing that I'm being offered. I'm not going down that line. Did it mean that all your training, all your beliefs, all your study of holistic medicine all came into being all at the same time?
Mm-hmm. It certainly did. And then the spiritual realm, I have a
Yeah.
lot, I feel like I have a lot of spiritual discernment that, that God, I knew something wasn't right, just something gut feeling, intuition just did not feel right. And then coupled with everything that I knew. And it was very interesting because, my husband also is a very rational, very logical thinker. And he said to me, he says, well, they've been studying mRNA for more than 20 years. And, it's used for these particular vaccines. And me being ever the person, with a suspicious, suspicious thinking, I said, yes, I said, but we do have vaccines out there, and we do have things that work. And so if it's been sitting on a shelf for over 20 years and is just being pulled out now, either it didn't work to begin with, or they couldn't find a way to monetize it. And in fact, that is exactly what happened.
I agree with you. And also, that whole what I felt was, well, hold on a minute. You've shut us all down. You're saying there is this virus, and now within 8-9 months, you're saying, oh, we've got the cure for this.
Mm-hmm.
Please take this. In fact, if you take this, then you can have your freedom back. You remember those type of
Oh,
phrases.
yes.
So that immediately sets off alarms and
Mm-hmm.
goes, hold on a minute, no, because within the UK we crashed the economy. It's as simple as that. Put us
Mm-hmm.
into this debt, and then of course, then there were these conferences of Gavi and all of this kind of thing, pushing vaccines all over the place. I'm not I'm not asking these questions just for the history lesson. I'm asking because I'm having the privilege to sit down with someone who is medically trained, and that's the whole point. And these viewpoints are really important, and it's also encouraging. I know others who did who did speak up, but sadly, I don't think enough over here. Or there's one or two people that have, and then they're being prosecuted for that. Sadly,
Mm-hmm.
um, taking us into the direction, the whole issue of when you say the medical industrial complex, and this whole thing that we have arrived at in a society where we're convinced that there's more than two genders.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because this is where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
And your medical expertise, what are you're using that? Are you then talking about when sadly children who may be male transitioning to a female and vice versa, you are then using those skills to help those children transition back? Is that a fair assessment?
That is something that we are looking into now. And when I say we, the team that as well, are looking into, because there are certainly a number of those individuals. I am, preliminarily right now trying to spread the word, because back in the day, before there were transgender fellowships, my fellowship was the one, if you were a urologist and you wanted to go into transgender medicine, my fellowship is the one that you did, because we learned how to reconstruct the pelvis for both sexes. And so I know the inner workings of, the male and female pelvis, and how to rebuild things. I mean, I used my skills to heal people. I didn't use it to deconstruct healthy tissue and then try to form something artificial. But I am one of very, very few surgeons who actually, has spoken up about this, because I know the complications of of these surgeries. I know the long-term ramifications. I know this because I've dealt with it. I never did the reassignment surgeries. I was not into that morally, ethically, and it just also, I had no interest. But I do know how to do those procedures, and I've taken care of the complications of such, and have also taken care of a number of transgender patients, having been sent to me as a urologist for various conditions that they've had that have been a result of trying the transitioning route.
In America, can you put a sort of a time, or maybe a very difficult, but a sort of span of a number of years when suddenly this whole ideology was being pushed that arrived in surgical facilities in America? Can you put a date on that at all, Melanie?
I can. So, it started back in the very early 80s to really kind of start to gain momentum. But even with that, there were very few physicians who were even doing these sorts of procedures. We have seen that as of 2015, when social media really came on the scene, we saw a dramatic spike in the ideology and children being influenced by social media, and it has become a social contagion. So it was gaining momentum. Then it hit a spike in 2015, and then 5 years later, when COVID came along in 2020, then we really saw it explode, because they were able to isolate everyone, keep the kids on social media. They had no outside, personal interactions with kids. And at that point in time is when I saw things really start taking a very sinister turn.
Right. Let's come back to 2020. You make an amazing observation in regard to what you're saying in 2015 and the explosion on social media. So could you describe what you were observing? What was, I know, but it's good to have this discussion. What was being pumped at young people? What was the ideology that was being pumped at young people?
That if you have any inkling, as an adolescent or pre-adolescent, if you had any inkling of feeling odd, feeling out of place, as all kids do when, we've all had to go through puberty.
Yeah.
We've all felt that way in one way, shape, or form. But when you have these children isolated and they are on social media, and that is the only thing that they have because they're in lockdown, they can't go outside and play, which they should have been. But nevertheless, that's a whole different story. But the isolation. And so what ends up happening is just like what we saw when video games came about. Children stopped going outside and exercising and playing and getting fresh air. Well, now we're seeing this epidemic where children are locked down. They have no social interactions except for all of these chat rooms that they're on social media. And it's very easy for people to hide behind their keyboards. And it's very easy for the devil to lurk, in those areas and infiltrate those areas where kids are they are meeting in these chat rooms, and they're all talking about their bodies and how they're uncomfortable in their bodies, the normal puberty things that we all had to go through. And suddenly here come predators. And well, did you ever think that maybe you were born in the wrong body? And we saw an explosion from there.
When you're using that term predators, I agree, but I'd like a definition. Who were coming at them from that predatory position? Are we talking institutions? What was that viewpoint that was coming at them? Where was it coming from?
Yeah, so a lot of it was activist groups. Yes, certainly, institutions. Just these people who already have this frame of mind. I would lump them under activists, but activist predators, because they are taking the minds of children and warping those things. That's how the devil originally, that's how original sin came about. The devil induced confusion and questioning in a confusing sort of way. And that's exactly what happened. And so it came from a variety of different places, but there were already some of these organizations that, the LGBTQ community already had. Well, then they set up these groups on social media. And of course, these children, these adolescents, join these chat rooms because there's a lot of social reinforcement and a lot of praise for embracing your authentic self, as they say. And kids become very addicted to this positive reinforcement, without the wisdom and the life experience to know that they're being played and that they are, they are deliberately being modified and having their very malleable minds twisted in ways that, confusing basically natural bodily processes.
And because fundamentally, once certain changes have gone through, you may be able, and I want you to correct me, you may be able to go back so far, but actually you are then having to be reliant on pharmakeia, so to speak, for the rest of your life. So let's just clarify that. So they make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Where's this? I mean, as a parent, I'm thinking, no, this is a no-no. But where are parents involved in this? Why are they then turning around and going, well, I just want what's best for my children, without absolutely realizing that what is best for their children is not to go down this road?
Mm-hmm.
Melanie, what are your thoughts on that, and observing parents?
Mm-hmm. So, it's a very slippery slope, because we were always taught that our physicians know best for our health. You go to the doctor, you get medical treatment, the doctors know best. And unfortunately, the doctors the majority of them have drunk the Kool-Aid. And it's also incredibly lucrative. So it's multifaceted. Parents, I think, genuinely do want what's best for their children, at least the majority of parents, but they look to doctors, they look to mental health professionals to help guide them in what is best for their children. And when children start becoming confused, instead of relying on other parents, I mean, it's not like being a parent comes with an instruction manual. Having children comes with an instruction manual. But there's that old saying, it takes a village to raise a child. And, for centuries, the village has helped to raise children. You look to your parents and your grandparents when you become a parent to, hey, what did you do when you encountered this? And instead of seeking the wisdom of the years, and seeking, in my case, seeking the spiritual guidance of my church family, parents are just kind of relying on their own devices. And then they go and take their children to see these counselors and these therapists, but rules have already been set that if therapists don't affirm a child's thought about themselves, then their licenses can be taken. So counselors, mental health professionals aren't even free to actually counsel these children without an agenda. And that has all been put into play by activists and, progressives, in the name of progress, when in fact that's not what it is. And so a long way of saying, where are parents? Parents are being misled. There are some individuals that just think that absolutely this is best for their child. Where they get that, I have no idea. Whether it's narcissistic, whether it's Munchausen's, I have no idea. But the majority of parents are looking to their healthcare providers for guidance, and they are getting the absolute wrong information.
Because if you said to these parents, as I'd said earlier about dear Sammy and his experience, if you had said to them, well, you know, what the Nazis did with twins and experimenting by putting them in cold water, etc., trying to separate, they would turn around and go, well, that was just evil. That was just wrong.
Correct.
But they can't see, and tell me if you think I'm being out of order, they can't see a link with what they're proposing for what we would call the mutilation of their child. They don't see it in the same way.
That is correct. They do not see it in the same way because doctors and healthcare professionals are not giving them the facts. These hormones that these children are being put on, these are the same powerful medications that I put men on with prostate cancer. There aren't any studies showing what it does to these little bodies, to use these kinds of medications. And every detransitioner that I have spoken with have all said, the hormones just made me crazy. In fact, I was just with a couple last week, and both of them said exactly the same thing. I was not thinking clearly on hormones. They just made me crazy. And therein lies the agenda, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as my opinion. And I say my opinion because not everybody believes in the Bible, but of course I use that as the rule book, and at least for my life. And it doesn't specifically talk about transgender ideology, but it does talk about, and the Bible does say, people will see the truth and they won't believe it. And that is exactly what's happening. And back in the the 50s and 60s, I remember my daddy telling me, back in the day, that back in the 50s and 60s, Khrushchev had said something to the effect of, give me your youth and I will rule your country in 30 years. And that is exactly what's happening. They are going after the children because the children are the most malleable. They are the most vulnerable. The majority of these children that are being preyed upon are vulnerable because of things like autism and sexual abuse and things like that. So their minds are already very malleable from the fact that they are children. But then you add these traumas and these other things in. Children need guidance. And if somebody is not providing good, strong, sound guidance, then kids will take advice, and even parents will take advice from whoever is speaking the loudest. And that's what I believe that the agenda is. Then you start warping the children's minds. You give them these medications that make them, as the ladies, the detransitioner ladies who are going through the process of detransitioning now said last week, the hormones made me crazy. You add that in, and then you get the system taking the children away from the parents because the parents aren't affirming. You put them into CPS, in the foster care system, and it is ripe and fraught with segueing and moving those children right into trafficking and different things like that. So it is an agenda. I do believe that, and we can go down these rabbit holes all day. If we want to stick strictly to the scientific, we can absolutely discuss that, but one plays into the other,
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Hence why we have met through mutual friends and what we're all trying to deal with. And when you say the CPS, I'm assuming that you're talking about Child Protection Services.
Correct.
Yeah. Incredible when you're describing these women that say that the hormones may make them go completely mad. What is the average age of of a young child that is then saying, well, I want to start transitioning? And what's the average age at young age that they are then put on these hormones, these drugs?
Yeah, so children as young as 5 and 6 are put on puberty blockers. The general average age is
Wow.
between 10 and 14. So you have puberty blockers, which are the medications that are supposed to halt puberty. And they're being told the lie that, oh, well, it's fine. We'll just halt puberty until you figure it out, figure out who you want to be. And then, we'll take you off of the puberty blockers, and then you can go through puberty once you figure it out. Well, the problem is those medications are making it even more confusing. Kids aren't going to figure it out if they don't go through puberty. That's the whole point of puberty. But yeah, generally around 9 to 14, 10 to 14, around in there is where we're seeing these children being subjected to these really powerful medications. And if they've already started going through puberty, then they're given cross-sex hormones. So basically the opposite sex hormones to influence their bodies in the opposite direction, which is fraught with, lots of times irreversible damage just from, high levels of hormones that were not meant to be that high, in their bodies. And what happens is you destroy that endocrine system. So even if you do want to transition back to, your original sex and the identity of your original sex, you're going to be on medication for the rest of your life.
When you talk about the endocrine system, could you just describe that? What you mean biologically?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the endocrine system is the system of the body that produces hormones and regulates those bodily functions. So, the endocrine system produces things, like cortisol and testosterone and estrogen and those sorts of things. So when you start playing around with that system artificially and you start disrupting that system, much like we saw with the COVID vaccines, when you start manipulating those particular systems and you cause a weak link in the natural chain of production of what the body is naturally supposed to do, it doesn't end well.
I'm sitting here trying to get my head around the fact that there's 5 or 6-year-olds put on these hormones and these drugs, and then to work out. So they're going into schools. They then may be saying to their teachers, "Oh, I'm having these feelings. I'm not, not happy about my body," and then the teachers then there's a counselling. Parents are then not involved in that. Please tell me if I'm over exaggerating.
Nope,
And then next minute, they may find themselves in a doctor's surgery, put onto hormones, and the parents still don't know this.
Mm-hmm.
And they may be 5 and 6. I don't know how that actually works out, because I'm thinking of myself as a parent. I know exactly what's going on when my children were 5 or 6. So could you please explain that? How are we at that point? Is it this whole thing of turning around and saying, no, we've got loco parentis in schools? In fact, no, we actually own the children. We've got rid of the parentals and we're now in charge. Melanie.
That's exactly what's happening. The government thinks that they know better for your children than you do. And and so that is exactly what those of us are fighting here in the US. And fortunately, the new administration now is on the same page that yes, this is not acceptable. Thus, we have legislation and we have, the president signed the No Men and Women's Sports, So, we are making progress. We are shutting down these institutions, much like in your neck of the woods, the Tavistock Clinic. We are shutting down some of those places here in the US, but in fact, being licensed in all 50 states, just a couple of weeks ago, I got a notification from the Massachusetts State Medical Board because I'm licensed in all 50 states. So I get these notifications from state medical boards when there are changes being made and so on and so forth. So even though there are these bills that are being signed and the legislation that is moving through, places like Massachusetts become a sanctuary state. And that is in fact what the email was that I got from the state board of Massachusetts saying, hey, if you are a provider that provides gynecological reproductive care, so basically abortion, if you are a doctor that provides this kind of care and you've gotten in trouble in another state, no problem. Even if you've lost your license in another state for doing that, no problem. You come to Massachusetts. It is a sanctuary state. We won't even put on our medical board that you lost your license from another state. We are not going to extradite you. So if another state comes after you, as long as you're in the state of Massachusetts, you're safe here as a provider. You can continue to provide that care. They've even gone so far as to say they are taking the physicians' names and the providers' names off of the prescriptions for testosterone and things like that they are prescribing these hormones, so that they can't be tracked. The only information is the name of the clinic and not the name of the provider on the prescription. They won't even, they even said that they would not exchange medical information across state lines. And what I found very interesting is that they said, if you leave the state of Massachusetts, of course, we can't help you. So if you are, in trouble, so to speak, plan your travel carefully. And actually said that. I still have the email. I'm saving all of these things. I still have the email that was sent, and I found it just very interesting that the State Medical Board of Massachusetts said, if you are in trouble in another state and you leave Massachusetts, plan your travel carefully. So there are multiple multiple states in the US that are sanctuary states.
I am not going to hide this in the fact that we just had a little blip in regard to the internet, in regard to tech, as Melanie was talking about being if you have been in trouble with other state boards, that you were then, it could be encouraged to go and work in Massachusetts. And she then made a statement about in regard to being careful about your travel there or your travel out of state. Rather very, very I just find that very interesting, that complete disruption. Melanie, let's go back, because I sense that actually at some point when you're free, we'll end up scheduling another discussion, because there is so much to talk about this. I'm still trying to get my head around. I've known about this, but when you're talking to an expert as yourself, like yourself, where 5 or 6 year olds are having this, and you then talk about the fact that when they have transitioned and they transition back, that they are then on drugs for the rest of their lives. So those drugs that they are on for the rest of their lives, what are those drugs doing to them?
Well, so if you are, for instance, a male, a biological male, and you transition to a female, you are subjected, of course, to high levels of estrogen, which then causes the testicles to, for lack of a better term, shrivel up. So the technical term is atrophy. So it causes the testicles to atrophy. They stop producing sperm. You start getting a more feminine appearance, grow breasts, those sorts of things. Then when you have to go back, or, you detransition and you are shifting back, the problem is you've already damaged that circuit, so to speak, that is producing the testosterone, so the endocrine system. You've damaged that pathway. So your body is not producing the amount of testosterone that you should have normally developed. So you have to always be on testosterone for the rest of your life. Now, there is a reason why when an adult male comes in and they're having symptoms of fatigue and loss of muscle mass and things like that, that we check their testosterone levels, because lower levels of testosterone in men needs to be supplemented, because it is responsible for a lot of the bodily functions and actually just optimal health. The body is a perfectly working machine. When it's making what it should, the body functions properly. So for adult men, we have to supplement them with testosterone. There is a reason why we monitor their blood work, because higher levels of testosterone create situations where you are more susceptible to blood clots, cardiac events, all of those, certain cancers. You're predisposed to certain cancers with high levels of testosterone or estrogen. You're just inducing the body to do things that it wasn't meant to do. And in fact, what you're trying to do now, you've already damaged the body, so to speak, by subjecting it to high levels of the opposite hormone. So now you're trying to go back. So now you've disrupted the bodily system. Now you're trying to make it go back, and the body doesn't generally like that very well. So things start happening, and you generally don't ever get to experience just an optimal hemostasis in your body where everything is functioning properly and you feel well.
So actually, in some people's cases, when, say, there is a young boy that maybe thinking, I'm not starting adolescence and not having difficulties with that, trying to work things out, that actually sometimes that could also be not having enough testosterone, and then helping to manage that. And when that is managed and they're out the other side, then everything's fine. And as you excuse my sort of non-medical way of trying to explain this, but as you've alluded, quite rightly said, that when that isolation, people hear activist rhetoric, people saying, well, if you feel like this, then this is what you're going through. Then say, I'm talking about a young boy, it could be a young girl as well, of course, but particularly in young boy and testosterone, then they're latching onto that and say, that is the answer, that is my problem.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Wow. And like I said, these children, they don't have the life experience, that we have as adults. I mean, that's why you go through a natural maturation process. That's part of living, to gain that wisdom. Children simply do not have that level of discernment and wisdom to know that if they start manipulating these sorts of things, that it may be irreversible. I mean, all a kid knows during puberty, and as I said, we all went through it, pre-adolescence and adolescence, when you're going through puberty, you just want to be accepted. Everybody feels different going through puberty. You feel like a different human being. And once the hormones kick in and normalize, and you kind of get out on the other side, then then you're okay. And in fact, a study from 2018, from March of 2018, actually showed that if you allow children to go through natural puberty, over 80% of those children will desist. They may end up identifying as gay, but they're not going to identify as transgender, which in fact is less than 0.5% of the population. True gender dysphoria and true intersex state, and what we're talking about is actually less than, combining all of that together, less than 1% of the population. So what we're speaking of is what should be called rapid onset gender dysphoria, that is induced by outside influences.
Got you. I suppose you're then talking about this whole thing of, XY chromosomes, having an extra chromosome. The percentage of those people is 0.003%.
Correct.
0.36% or whatever. Very
Correct.
so small. And we're not saying that that doesn't happen. That does happen.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're talking about is this whole thing of social encouragement
Mm-hmm.
to, it may sound a bit extreme, it's not, social encouragement to mutilation and the cost of that when you're talking about the drugs
Correct.
at such a young age. Wow. I'm still thinking, where are the parents questioning any of this?
Mm-hmm.
So when I describe that teachers are picking this up, that well, we've had that over here. We've had that over here. When they're encouraging this, and this divide. Also, your father, when he's quoting Khrushchev, sound an extremely intelligent man, and knew his stuff in regard to the undermining of the social fabric of society,
Mm-hmm.
undermining of the social fabric of America,
Mm-hmm.
and this whole thing within the USSR, turning around and saying we are going to control the children,
Mm-hmm.
propaganda, what we can feed them. We've gone full circle, but
Mm-hmm.
that is where we've ended up. Um, Melanie, in your opinion, I don't know if you know enough about it. Is I'm sure you do. This whole thing of the experiments of Kinsey in the 50s, this whole thing of pushing against society. I mean, I think that unleashed so much on American society and around the world that was profoundly evil and unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think people are aware enough of these, are aware of studying people like Freud, etc., in the past? Do you think people are informed enough of these people, of what they stood for and what they were pushing?
I don't. I don't, because again, where did all of this begin? How did we get here? And and I actually just really hate that question when people say, or people ask the question, well, how do you think we got to this whole transgender ideology? Well, how far back do you want to go?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it started with Adam and Eve.
yeah.
But it has been a sequential undermining of global society.
Mm,
It has been. And, in my opinion, and this is certainly not, this is certainly not, biological fact by any means, but my opinion, because I do believe in the Bible,
mm,
it is, in my opinion, a grand plan to undermine society in a systematic way, with psychological warfare, because that if you can get to the soul of an individual and you
mm.
can capture the soul, if you can capture the mind, you can capture the soul. And that is what has been systematically happening. And it's little things that happen gradually that you don't think about until all of a sudden here it is at your doorstep, and there are these major things happening. So for instance, yes, my daddy quoted Khrushchev, and he was also a very traditional guy, saying and would tell me the downfall of society was when women were put into the workforce, taken out of the home and put in the workforce. So nobody was there to raise the children. And, that whole traditional nuclear family. And it's just these little incremental changes that those things start happening. Both parents are now working. It becomes high stress. Then there's a higher rate of divorce. And then children, don't have either parent, and abuse starts happening. And so it just starts this
I hear
cycle.
you. I hear
And,
you. And
and
it creates
people,
and it creates double tax revenue for the government.
and so I just believe that it is a systematic, undermining of society to get to a point where, there is complete mind control, psychological warfare, and the information is there, but we are at a point where people see the truth, just like the Bible says, people will see the truth, but they will not believe it. It is right there in front of them, and they will not believe it. They will explain it away. They will make excuses for it. And I have said before, if you're offended by the truth, good, because that means there's still hope for you. That means, you're not claiming offense because you're truly offended. Taking offense to truth is actually because you're uncomfortable and you don't want to deal with it. And I believe that that's true for anything. And that's purely my opinion, but that's how I think that we got here. And studying those things and those particular things being taught in schools, just like the people that don't believe that the Holocaust was real, because these sorts of things, history is being taken out of schools, and it's not just happening in America. It is happening all over. And when you take away history and people cannot study history, they can't see the patterns. But we're also to the point where people aren't putting two and two together. They're not critical thinkers anymore. They want to press the easy button. They want somebody to think for them. And therein lies the problem, because then, goal achieved.
Absolutely. And thank you. And praise God that you are a critical thinker, Melanie, and using all those gifts and talents that you have to explain things, because it is a huge spiritual battle. And we're in the last sort of couple of minutes, and I'll wrap up in a minute. But just to reflect back to you, there's a couple of subjects that are not taught over here. One is the true biblical flood and why it happened, and the consequences of that. Not enough people, if at all, a dear friend of mine preaches that. And also not having an understanding of Genesis 6 verses 1-8, when the fallen angels came down to earth and had sex with human women. When I read that for the first time and woke up in 2010, it completely changed my life. That was it, period. These things are not taught enough. Melanie, I'll give you 30 seconds. Is there anything else that you would like to say?
Yes, there is. And, I am a devout Christian, and I am not afraid. Yes, we had this blip in the screen when we were talking about these things. I don't have a spirit of fear about speaking the truth, because I know how the book ends and I know where my heart is, and whatever happens, I'm a winner either way. So I don't speak out in fear. Everybody needs to know the truth. I would not be living, living my faith if I didn't speak the truth. And the one thing that I close with is that we don't have a gender ideology problem. We have a people don't know Jesus problem. And we need to work on these children and guide these children such that their preferred pronouns are chosen and redeemed.
Amen. Melanie, it's been beyond a pleasure to sit down and have an amazing discussion with you. And I just want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
and for doing it. And it's been amazing. And I hope that we can do it again. So please stay with me. Don't go. I'll say goodbye to you over the other side, and then we can get it, make sure that it's downloaded. But I just want to thank you so much and encourage everyone. There'll be a number of comments in notes of where to just to read about the work that Melanie's doing and some other books. But also, I think next time Melanie and I will also include the subject of transhumanism in this, because that's what we need to do. But anyway, thank you so much. I'm going to play us out.